An interesting topic on economics which talks about government securities, abbreviated as GSEC. This GSEC is basically a debt instrument which is issued by RBI in India, and this is on behalf of the central government, or what we call as Government of India, or the state governments. Now this government security, how does it function and why these government securities are issued? Let's understand those. So if we focus on any corporate bond, what happens? There is a bond which is issued, and this bond has certain amount which is invested into that, and the corporate promises to give you the money back, which is your principal amount, along with a fixed interest. Now this interest, what is known as coupon rate, can be either fixed or floating. Now the same happens with GSEC. GSEC is when government requires money. When government needs money, government borrows that money, and this money is borrowed in various forms. Now once this money is borrowed, the principal amount is taken by the government, and government promises you to return that principal amount along with any interest, if any, on a promised date or a promised time period. Now government securities can be broadly classified into two types. It can be short run or long run. Under short run, we call these as Treasury Bills. Treasury Bills are also known as T-bills. These T-bills are issued in three denominations or for three time periods. Those are 91 days, 364 days. So remember, all treasury bills are less than 1 year, and therefore we call them as short-term government securities. And another one is 182 days. Under treasury bill, there is no interest payment, so there is no interest rate. It's just the difference between the maturity price and the issue price. So let's say the face value of the coupon is rupees 100, but the issue price was rupees 95. That means you invested rupees 95, you would get rupees 100, and that 5 rupees would be your benefit, as simple as that. And that is what is treasury bills or T-bills. The long-term bills are known as government bonds. These bonds are also called as dated government securities, and these dated government security have a fixed date. Now against these bonds, there can be a fixed interest rate or a floating interest rate. What is the difference? Under fixed interest rate, whatever time period you are considering your bond to be there, you would say, okay, for this time period I would have, let's assume, 5% as the interest rate. So if that bond is for 5 years, usually these government bonds are from 5 years to 40 years time period, and if it is for 5 years at 5% interest rate, that is a fixed interest rate. There can be another proposition where floating interest rates are given. What are those floating interest rates? Floating interest rate means that the government would give you a prior notice that for the coming 6 months, let's say 3% would be the interest rate. For the next 6 months, it would be 3.25%, or for the next year, it is 4% or whatsoever. So it is called as floating interest rate, also called as coupon rate. So interest rate or coupon rate is the same terminology that you can use. So either a fixed interest rate or a floating interest rate. Now these GSECs are what we have explained here. Very, very interesting, very, very simple. But it's not just this. Besides the debt funds, the banks and the financial institutions can purchase these instruments. Now besides debt funds, there can also be mutual funds which can be issued. Now there is another interesting term which is known as gilt funds. What are these gilt funds? Gilt funds says that 80% would be invested either in government securities, or it would be invested in state development loans, or the remaining percent, which is SGS, and the remaining 20% would be kept as cash or cash equivalent. So that is what is gilt funds. Now these gilt funds were first introduced in United Kingdom by United Kingdom government by the Bank of England, and this was an original certificate which was issued by the British government and had gilt edges, and therefore was called as gilt funds. So that was the reason why it is called as gilt funds. Now the most important thing is the first issuance of gilt fund was seen in 1694, and this was for King William III, and King William III actually wanted a huge amount to fight war against France and had to borrow nearly 1.2 million pounds, and this was the amount borrowed by King William III in order to fight the war with France, and there was where the origin of the term gilt funds came. Now these gilt funds are commonly seen in three nations. Those are UK, India and South Africa. One of the major things that we need to understand with these government securities is the associated risk. So when it comes to risk associated with government securities, I would say the credit risk is nearly none, because since it's the government, the repayment by the government would be there, and there are no issues with repayment by the government. So ultimately you would have the credit risk score which would be nil. The liquidity rate would be big, because it can be easily sold in the secondary market, and it can also be used as collaterals. The next important thing is here the interest rate risk would be relatively higher. So those are some of the essential things that we need to know about the G6. Now under this we have already talked about the short-term treasury bills, the long-term or the dated government securities. There is another term which has been recently introduced, and that is the cash management bills, also called as CMBs. Now these are an exceptional case which are less than 91 days. So from 91 days onwards we have the treasury bill, but if the government requires it for a very short duration, it would be brought as a cash management bill, and this cash management bill is just to offset the temporary mismatch in the cash flow of the government for a very short duration, and that is less than 91 days, less than 3 months as it can be explained. So three important elements under GSEC, a very important and an interesting topic in economics. We would be covering many important sessions in economics, science and tech and many other topics. So stay tuned for updated information. Wish you very good luck.